Welcome to the deep dive. We're really glad you're here with us today
We absolutely are.
because if you are listening to this right now, it tells us something very specific about you. It means you are someone who just loves to learn. You're looking for that deep knowledge. You want to explore multiple perspectives.
And you live for those sudden aha moments.
Yes, exactly. But at the same time, you absolutely do not want the overwhelm of information overload. You want a shortcut to being well-informed, and that is exactly what we are going to provide for you today.
That's right. And for this particular deep dive, we are jumping into a truly fascinating piece of ancient literature. We're looking at Genesis chapter 45.
Which is just an incredible text.
It is. If you're at all familiar with the text, you know this is the climactic, highly emotionally charged moment where Joseph finally reveals his true identity to his brothers.
And we have a massive stack of materials to draw from today to really flesh this out. You're looking at theological commentaries. We've got historical and archaeological analyses and really in-depth study guides, and even a few pastoral sermons.
The great mix of sources.
Right. And our mission today is to go way beyond just a simple story of a family reunion. We are going to unpack the profound concept of divine providence. We're going to dig into the crucial psychological difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. And we'll look at how ancient Egyptian politics literally set the stage for the birth of an entire nation.
It really is a dense, multi-layered text. I mean, to truly appreciate the weight of chapter 45, you have to understand the incredible tension that has been building up to this exact moment in the narrative.
Okay, let's unpack this because we should probably set the stage for anyone who might need a quick refresher.
Good idea.
Up until this point, Joseph has been testing his brothers. He is currently the second most powerful man in Egypt, but he is completely unrecognizable to the brothers who, sold him into slavery 22 years ago.
A lifetime ago, essentially.
Exactly. So he's just planted a silver cup in the bag of his youngest brother, Benjamin, and he's threatened to keep Benjamin as a slave. And then Judah steps up. Judah offers himself as a slave in Benjamin's place, literally begging the Egyptian ruler to spare their father, Jacob, from dying of grief.
Which is just a stunning reversal of his past behavior.
Right. It's this ultimate, undeniable proof that these men have fundamentally changed.
And that transformation in Judah is the catalyst for everything that happens next. The emotional dam just completely breaks for Joseph. The text says he commands all the Egyptians to leave the room. He actually shouts, "Make everyone go out from me."
Which is wild.
Yeah, and then he weeps so loudly that Pharaoh's household and the Egyptians standing outside the room can actually hear him crying.
Just a stunning image when you try to visualize it. The second in command of a global superpower, just completely losing it, crying uncontrollably. But before we get too far, just to clarify for everyone listening, the commentaries refer to Joseph's position as a vizier. What exactly is a vizier in this context?
That is a great question. In ancient Egypt, the vizier was the highest-ranking official under the pharaoh. Think of it as a prime minister, the chief justice, and the head of the treasury all rolled into one single role.
Wow.
He had absolute terrifying authority over the daily operations of the entire empire.
Got it. So this incredibly powerful guy clears the room of his interpreters and his elite guards. Isn't that incredibly dangerous? I mean, he's leaving himself alone with 11 desperate men.
It is entirely vulnerable. And what's fascinating here is how much this specific action violates the cultural expectations of the time.
How so?
Well, ancient Near Eastern rulers, especially in Egypt, were expected to project absolute, unwavering control at all times. The historical records we have from that era constantly praise the pharaoh or the vizier, who is quote-unquote steady of heart.
Oh, interesting.
Showing unrestrained, loud emotion like this was considered a complete breach of royal Egyptian decorum. But in this moment, Joseph just doesn't care. It's this raw, beautiful display of his covenant faith and his humanity completely overriding court etiquette.
So he's alone with them. And he speaks to them directly in their native Hebrew, totally dropping the Egyptian facade. He says the most shocking words they could possibly hear. He says, "I of Joseph, is my father still alive?"
Yeah.
And notice he focuses specifically on his father's vitality there, which is so poignant. But how did the brothers react to this? I imagine they were thrilled, right?
Not even a little bit. Their reaction is sheer terror. The sources point out that they couldn't even answer him. The specific Hebrew word used in the text to describe their reaction is bahal.
Baal.
Right, which translates to an inward trembling. They are absolutely terrified. You really have to put yourself in their shoes for a second. The reality is suddenly sinking in that this incredibly powerful Egyptian vizier, the man literally holding their lives in his hands, is the teenage boy they sold to human traffickers 22 years ago.
Right, they have to be assuming he's going to execute them.
Or enslave them on the spot. Exactly.
Yeah. But what Joseph does next is completely counterintuitive to human nature. He doesn't take revenge. He doesn't even yell at them. He actively works to disarm their terror. He says, "Come near to me, please."
Yeah, he bridges that physical gap.
He literally invites them into his personal space. And then he tells them not to be distressed or angry with themselves.
Which brings us to one of the most profound statements in the entire Old Testament. Joseph says to them, "God sent me before you to preserve life." Genesis 45:7 is really presented as the ultimate definition of divine providence within the worldview of this text.
Providence.
Yes. Providence, as defined by the theological sources we reviewed, is God's continuous, purposeful governance of creation. The authors are presenting a worldview where God ensures his plans unfold perfectly, but, and this is the really key part, without ever violating genuine human agency or free will.
That concept can be really hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile human free will with total divine sovereignty? The commentaries provide a brilliant analogy for this. Think of it like playing a game of chess against a master computer program.
I love this analogy. You, as the human player, have total free will. You can move your pieces however you want. You can enact any strategy you choose. You are making real autonomous decisions on that board.
Right.
But the computer is vastly more intelligent and anticipates every single possible move you could make out of millions of combinations. If you make a foolish move or even a malicious move, the computer doesn't force you to take it back.
It just adapts.
Exactly. It weaves your exact mistake into its ultimate, unstoppable winning strategy.
Applying that to the narrative, the brothers freely chose to commit a terrible, evil sin when they sold Joseph. They had total free will in that moment, and they chose poorly.
Very poorly.
But within this worldview, God is the grand chess master.
Yeah.
He took their freely chosen evil actions and bent them entirely toward life and redemption. As Joseph later says in Genesis 50, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good."
This raises an important question, though, about the actual mechanics of this divine strategy. Joseph reveals to his brothers that the famine they are currently experiencing has only been going on for 2 years.
Wow, only 2 years.
Yeah, there are still 5 more years left where there will be no plowing and no harvest. And by the way, based on the timeline given earlier in the text, this makes Joseph exactly 39 years old at this moment.
Okay.
He commands his brothers to go get their father, Jacob, and bring the entire family down to live in the land of Goshen, which is in Egypt.
And on the surface, that just looks like practical disaster relief. Move to where the food is, right?
Right, but if we connect this to the bigger picture, a much deeper strategic reason emerges within the narrative. Why didn't God just miraculously provide food for the covenant family back in Canaan, the land they were originally promised?
That is a great point. He could have just made it rain there.
He could have. But the theological guides explain that Canaan posed a massive threat of cultural assimilation. The family was relatively small at this point, just a few dozen people.
A drop in the bucket.
Exactly. And they were at very high risk of blending in, intermarrying, and adopting the pagan practices of the surrounding Canaanites. If they stayed there, they likely would have lost their distinct identity entirely.
But Egypt was completely different. The Egyptians absolutely despised foreigners, and they specifically found shepherds to be an abomination. So by moving the Israelites into the Egyptian region of Goshen, they were essentially being put into a cultural incubator.
An incubator, yes.
They were geographically isolated. The Egyptians wouldn't mix with them because of their profession. This isolation allowed the family to safely multiply over the next few centuries into a massive nation of millions without losing their unique cultural and religious identity.
It's brilliant.
But wait, earlier you said the Egyptians despised shepherds. If that's the case, why on earth would the ruler of Egypt give prime real estate to Joseph's shepherd family? That's like a massive contradiction.
That is exactly what historians wrestled with for a long time. But the historical analyses we reviewed highlight a fascinating detail. This specific pharaoh was likely of Hyksos origin. Yes, the Hyksos were a Semitic people who had actually migrated, conquered, and ruled parts of northern Egypt during this specific historical era.
Here's where it gets really interesting. So a native Egyptian pharaoh would likely have been totally disgusted by an influx of Semitic shepherds. But a Hyksos pharaoh, sharing a similar Semitic background with Joseph's family, would naturally be incredibly welcoming to them.
Offering them royal wagons and the absolute fat of the land. Exactly. And this isn't just a convenient literary theory. The archaeological sources point to some incredible corroboration that makes this entire account historically plausible.
I saw that in the notes. But the skeptic in me has to ask, is there any actual historical proof that a Semitic family moved into Egypt and thrived during a massive famine? What kind of evidence did they actually find?
Quite a bit, actually. For instance, there is a document called the Brooklyn Papyrus.
Okay.
It dates back to the 18th century BC. It explicitly lists numerous Semitic slaves working in Egyptian households, which aligns perfectly with Joseph's initial situation when he was first sold into Potiphar's house.
And what about that city the archaeologists excavated? I read something about a place called Avaris.
Yes, that's the modern excavation site known as Tel Ed-Daba. Archaeologists found significant Asiatic or Semitic settlements there from this exact era. We are talking about massive grain storage silos, which obviously aligns with Joseph's famine preparations.
That's incredible.
But the most stunning find was a high-status tomb of a Semitic official. Inside this tomb, they uncovered the remains of a multicolored statue depicting this official.
A high-ranking Semitic official in Egypt with a multicolored coat or statue. That is incredibly reminiscent of a certain coat of many colors. That's just amazing.
It really is. Furthermore, there is an artifact known as the famine stela located on Sahel Island.
Wait, real quick, when you say a stela, what exactly are we talking about?
Oh, right. A stela is basically a giant, ancient stone slab used for monuments, government decrees, or historical records. Think of it like an ancient permanent billboard.
Okay, got it. A billboard made of stone.
Exactly. This particular stone slab, the famine stela, actually records a massive 7-year famine where the Nile failed to flood, which led to centralized state-managed grain quotas.
Wow.
Now, while these artifacts don't strictly prove the biblical narrative word for word, they absolutely remove naturalistic objections by showing that the cultural, political, and historical setting described in Genesis 45 is incredibly accurate.
Let's shift gears a bit, because the study guides draw a brilliant, distinct line between what it means to forgive someone and what it means to reconcile with them. We often use those two words interchangeably in our modern culture, but this story demonstrates how they're very, very different things.
They are entirely different dynamics. Forgiveness is an internal dynamic. It is the act of letting go of the debt to avoid letting bitterness rot your own heart.
Right.
According to the psychological analyses in our sources, Joseph had clearly done this in his heart years ago, long before he ever laid eyes on his brothers again. When he finally sees them, there is no bitterness or desire for vengeance in him.
But reconciliation is an interpersonal dynamic. Reconciliation actually requires the offender to repent and change their behavior. Joseph didn't just blindly reconcile with the men who sold him into slavery. That would have been dangerous and, frankly, foolish.
Highly dangerous.
He put them through elaborate tests, like framing Benjamin with the silver cup, to ensure their character had changed, to ensure they were actually safe to be in a relationship with. Only when Judah proved they had changed did Joseph offer full interpersonal reconciliation.
And once that reconciliation is achieved, Joseph just showers them with gifts of grace. Pharaoh provides the transport wagons, but Joseph loads them up with provisions for the journey. He gives every brother new clothes.
Which is symbolic, right?
Deeply. The specific Hebrew word used is halafat, which implies a valuable prize or a token of high honor.
Which is deeply poetic justice. The very last interaction they had with his clothing was violently stripping his special coat off his back before throwing him in a pit to die. Now the reconciliation is marked by him dressing them in garments of honor.
It's a total reversal.
He also gives his youngest brother, Benjamin, 300 shekels of silver. So instead of a brother being sold for pieces of silver, silver is now being used to bless a brother.
But Joseph is also a realist. As he sends them on their journey back to Canaan to fetch their father, he gives them a very specific, almost funny warning. He tells them, do not quarrel on the way.
He knows them too well.
He intimately understands human nature. He knows that the adrenaline is going to wear off during that long walk home, and the brothers are going to be incredibly tempted to start fighting, pointing fingers, and blame shifting over whose fault it was that they sold him in the first place.
Of course they would.
He's essentially telling them, I have forgiven you. Now you need to go and forgive each other.
So the brothers make the long journey back to Canaan, and they walk up to their elderly father, Jacob, who has spent over 2 decades mourning the gruesome, violent death of his favorite son. They tell him Joseph is alive, and he actually rules all of Egypt.
And Jacob's reaction is entirely understandable. The text says his heart goes numb. He literally cannot believe them. It's just too much trauma and shock to process.
You really can't blame him. I mean, it sounds like a cruel, twisted joke. But then Jacob looks out and sees the Egyptian wagons. These aren't just everyday wooden carts we're talking about. These are royal, state-of-the-art Egyptian transports sent by Pharaoh himself.
Undeniable proof.
Right. Seeing this physical proof, the text tells us Jacob's spirit is revived. He says, "It is enough. I will go and see him before I die." It's the ultimate revival of a broken father.
Now, as we look at the sweep of this whole story, the theological commentaries highlight something really fascinating for those looking at the biblical text as a unified whole. They point out how much Joseph serves as a typology of Jesus Christ.
Can you give us a quick explain, like I'm five, on what a typology actually is?
Certainly. In literary and theological terms, a typology is essentially a historical echo or a literary foreshadowing. It's when a real historical person or event in the ancient text shares striking structural similarities with a later figure, in this case, Jesus.
It's like a pattern.
Exactly. It's a way for the authors to show a unified pattern throughout history.
And the parallels between Joseph and Jesus are actually staggering when you slow down and line them up. Both were the uniquely beloved sons of their fathers. Both were sent out by their fathers to check on their brothers, and both were violently rejected by their brethren.
The symmetry continues from there. Both were betrayed for exact pieces of silver. Both were stripped of their clothing by their captors.
Both were completely innocent, but were condemned to suffer alongside two criminals, right? For Joseph, it was the baker and the cupbearer in Pharaoh's prison. For Jesus, it was the two thieves on the cross. And in both of those cases, one criminal is saved and the other perishes.
Precisely. And ultimately, both Joseph and Jesus are exalted through their intense, unjust suffering to become the saviors of multitudes. They both end up providing the bread of life literally for Joseph and spiritually for Jesus to both their own people and to the surrounding Gentile nations.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? We've covered a massive amount of ground today. When you step back and look at the worldview this text is presenting, history isn't just random. The authors view it as being governed by a grand chess master who is capable of orchestrating even our darkest hardships and the evil actions of others for a larger life-saving purpose.
Beautifully said.
We've unpacked the profound psychological freedom that comes from understanding the difference between internal forgiveness and interpersonal reconciliation. And we've seen how the historical, political, and archaeological reality of ancient Egypt aligns remarkably with this narrative.
It really is a masterpiece of historical literature. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought that builds on what we've discussed today. Think back to that moment when Joseph finally broke down and wept.
Right.
The text explicitly notes that his weeping was so loud that the Egyptians standing outside his chambers overheard it. One of the pastoral sources makes a brilliant observation here. Unbelievers should witness Christians forgiving.
Wow. Think about the Egyptians in your own life right now. The secular world, your coworkers, your neighbors, the people who watch how you live from the outside. If they were to overhear your deepest moments of vulnerability, your pain, and specifically the way you offer forgiveness to people who have deeply, profoundly wronged you, what kind of testimony would they hear?
Would it sound exactly like the standard retaliatory culture we see everywhere today?
Or would it completely break protocol, violate the cultural decorum, and stop them dead in their tracks?
It's a highly challenging thought. True forgiveness is so rare that when it is expressed genuinely, it is loud, it echoes, and it has the power to change not just a family, but an entire nation.
That is a perfect place to leave it. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into Genesis 45. We hope it brought you some new insights, clarified a few complex ideas, and gave you a few of those aha moments. Keep learning, keep questioning, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.